Hello, everyone, and welcome to our today's webinar on turning the tables, client exit survey as CS strategy goldmine. I am Megha Pujari, admin of Customer Centricity Club, and your host for this webinar. I have with me today our guest speaker, Anita, who is a chief churn crusher at API. With 20 plus years of academic research experience, she's a go-to expert for B2B SaaS companies looking to boost customer lifetime value. Before we begin the seminar, I would like to introduce everyone to our community. Customer Centricity Club is an exclusive community built for B2B SaaS professionals and cross-functional teams to connect, learn, and share best practices for driving customer centricity in organizations. We are currently a community of 180 plus members, and anybody who's interested in joining our community can do so by visiting our website, customercentricity.club. To keep this webinar engaging, we have kept the chat open for all the participants. You can introduce yourself in the chats, and at any point during the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chats. I would also like to inform everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with our community and the registrants of this webinar. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Over to you, Anita.
Thank you very much. So happy to be here. And I personally think that this is an exciting topic, but we are going to start a little bit differently. I'm going to talk about milkshakes. And you might be wondering, okay, what do milkshakes have to do with exit surveys? I will tell you in a second. All right, so there's a major fast food chain that wanted to boost their milkshake sales. So they looked at their customer data, they segmented by both product and demographics, and then they went out to their restaurants and they wanted to interview their customers. What is their ideal milkshake? Got all this data, they went back, they made some changes, and you know what happened? Milkshake sales didn't improve. So, all right, well, we went and did this. Let's try something different. So what they did is they hired a company to come out and to observe first the customers that were buying milkshakes and leaving with them versus the customers that were drinking their milkshakes inside the restaurant. And what they found just from observing was that 40% of their customers would buy milkshakes first thing in the morning and then leave with them. And the execs were kind of confused about this. I know I was when I read this. Why are 40% of their milkshake sales being bought first thing in the morning? So what they did is they interviewed those customers that were buying those milkshakes first thing in the morning. And as they were leaving, they would ask if they could interview those customers. And what they discovered was that these customers wanted these milkshakes because they had a long commute. And this is important because not only did they have a long commute, they wanted something to do during the time that they were on their commute, but they didn't want to eat something that might get their hands and their clothes dirty. So they bought these milkshakes. Armed with this information, this company then went out and created a new product line, thicker shakes that lasted longer. They put fruit in it. And of course, it could be consumed cleanly with just one hand. They launched this new smoothie line specifically for these early morning commuters. And within the first quarter of launching this new product line, their revenues grew by 4.7%. That is quite significant. If the company hadn't done those customer interviews, they wouldn't have discovered that they actually were sitting on a brand new product line that boosted their revenues. So if this major company, and I'll give you a hint, it's got some golden arches. If this big company could use customer interviews as a way to discover this gem, I'm going to show you how you can do the same thing to discover similar gems in your company. So let me introduce myself. I'm Anita Toth, Chief Churn Crusher at ATI. You've already heard some of this. 20 plus years of academic experience with running interviews, so qualitative research methods. But I did specifically 14 of those years work in a qualitative research institute. And this is one of the major services that we offer to our clients, our customer interviews. So live, eat, breathe qualitative data. If you're looking for answers, I'm your girl. But let's talk about churn. And churn is actually quite a painful thing. And I want to define churn before we start, because I've seen churn calculated in all sorts of different ways. Very simply, it's when a customer is no longer a customer. If you have people who are on a free trial, they are not considered customers. They shouldn't be part of your churn score. So these are customers that we're paying who are no longer paying. And there are three really big problems with churn. First of all, you are losing a lot more than just your immediate revenues. You're also losing future upsells, the ability to cross-sell, the ability to create future customer advocates, and future referrals. And the other thing, churned customers, especially if they're really unhappy, they can do a lot of brand damage. So on the flip side, if your customers are happy, then it's one of the best free marketing methods out there. We've all asked colleagues and friends about recommendations for software or different products. So happy customers become a really great source of positive word of mouth marketing. The other thing that churn does is that it limits a company's profitability. So a 5% churn rate may sound really good, but in reality, you're losing half of your customers each year. So not are you only paying to acquire those customers, but to support them as well. And then they walk out the door. So it's really expensive. And if a company is to grow, you have to work 4 times as hard. So twice as hard to replace those customers. Plus, you need to add to your overall customer count and your MRR account, your MRR count. So the cost to replace a customer, first of all, you have to replace those immediate lost revenues. Second, you're paying to acquire a new customer to replace the one that you lost. You've lost all costs related to acquisition and serving that customer. And now the whole idea of growth at all costs is done. Investors are now starting to talk about balancing between growth and profits. And this is particularly where customer success and these churn interviews can help. It's on that profit side. And lastly, solving churn is really complex. It is not simple at all. This is a bit overwhelming. It's 25 churn factors. The good thing about this is that 22 of these, so product, value, service, and expectations, those are all within a company's control. The other, like market conditions, merger and acquisition, or like a champion change, are not. So the power is really in your hands to make a change. And I'm going to show you right now how you can use those customer exit interviews or churned customer interviews to look and find those opportunities to reduce churn. So creating your interview guide is the first step. And the questions that you're going to ask must align around the purpose of conducting your interviews. So in this case, it's pretty easy. You want to go to your churned customers and find out, why did they leave? What was going on for them? The interviews should be a maximum of 30 minutes long. Any longer than that, and it starts to get tiring for the customer. And there's been studies done. So what ends up happening is the quality of your answers the quality of their answers starts to degrade. And this is the interesting thing right here. You only want to have 2 or 3 themes and a maximum of 5 to 10 questions for the entire interview. So what is a theme? A theme might be you're choosing to look at 2 things specific to churn. You're going to ask questions around product, and you're going to ask questions around their decision to churn. One is psychological. You're trying to get an understanding of how your customers think when they're making this decision to churn. What is driving them? And you also want to see where there are opportunities to improve the product. And so these are two themes that you would ask. Now, when I say 5 to 10 questions for the entire interview, you are going to ask simple questions. And this is the real key to these interviews. You want to ask the customer to dig deep. So you want to ask them questions like, well, this is more of a statement. Tell me more about how that felt. Tell me more about your experience when a feature wasn't available, or how did it feel for you when you experienced, let's say, some negative thing along their customer journey? Maybe the onboarding experience was really difficult for them. So these are the things you want to dig into. That's why you don't want to have 50 questions. I want you to think of it this way. You have a choice of going shallow with your questions. Those are often your yes, no type of questions. You want to go deep. This is what we're going for, deep, is this depth. Okay, so surveys are very shallow. You get very little information. Your interviews are to go really deep. You're trying to get into the psychology of that decision making, like what's really going on in your customer's head, and also what they were feeling. And it might sound weird, like, why would I talk or ask the customers about how they're feeling? And that's because humans make decisions on emotions first, and we rationalize second. And it may seem counterintuitive. No, I look at numbers, I make decisions that way. But if you look a little more closely, you'll realize that your decisions are based on feelings first. So that will come into play a little bit later as I get into this presentation. But I want to make that clear. You want to keep this as simple as possible. So just two, maximum 3 themes, 5 to 10 questions, and you want to just keep asking the customer to go a little deeper with each of their responses, because that's where you're going to really discover what's going on and why they decided to leave. Okay, the second step is you need to recruit participants in your churn exit interviews. And there are 2 ways that you can do it. One is with an automated cancellation flow. So if you have a system where customers don't need to reach out to cancel, they can just do it on their own. This is a perfect place to do it. So there's generally a survey that goes along asking questions why you're churning. At the bottom, you can just add in a request. Would they be interested in having an interview to understand a little bit more the reasons why they decided to leave? The second way is to directly ask them to participate. So if you are in an executive business review, quarterly business review, you're having a meeting with them and they let you know that they're not going to renew, you can ask them directly, would you be interested in participating with this? So I will warn you now that when you first start this process, your participation rates might be really low, and this is totally normal. It's because when we start anything, think about when you first learned to drive or ride a bicycle. None of us were really good at it. This takes time to get to learn. So absolutely normal. You also want to use the same interviewers for consistency. Now, you want to have 2 dedicated team members to undertake all of your exit interviews. And it kind of comes down to the same reason why, your participation rates will be low in the beginning, what it was like when you first started driving or riding a bicycle. Interviewing is actually a skill. We think, oh, this is easy. I'll just ask a couple of questions, no big deal. But it's not actually like that. You get to learn and listen. So it's taking that active listening, and you're now taking it to a whole different level, because you have your questions that are guiding you, but really you want to get the customers to open up and be as honest as possible with you. So interviewing is a skill. You'll also be able to better identify emerging information. So if you have the same interviewers who are on your team who are doing these customer interviews, they're going to start hearing new things. But if you have different people doing the interviews, the challenge is that it brings in different biases. The skill level might not be as advanced, but if they may not be able to notice that actually things are changing in the responses they're hearing. So you want to standardize as much as possible. Keep things exactly the same. So then that way it's easiest to compare apples to apples. But if you're always changing something up with your interviewers, then you risk losing the opportunity to be early in catching changes that are happening with the customers. And the other, I get asked this question a lot too. Well, should the CSM who is, working with that customer interview them? And I emphatically say no, they should not. And the reason is we all have our social faces, right? How are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? And we keep things at a surface level. The whole point of the exit interviews is to go as deep as possible. So if you like your CSM and you're not renewing, you're leaving, sometimes it's really hard to be brutally honest. And instead, what customers will do is they will give a more socially acceptable answer, especially if they still want the CSM to like them. They don't want to hurt the CSM's feelings. Like, we're still human here. And so we've got to bear this in mind. So I suggest 2 people, that's why there's 2 people on the screen that would undertake the interviews, and they are not associated with the customer. So this may mean that, you have to figure out who's with who, but hopefully the 2 CSMs that you pick, or as yourself as a leader, are not interviewing the customers that you actually work closely with. And of course, the last reason why you want 2 people is that if one of them changes jobs or is unavailable for whatever reason, or is working with the customer that is churning, you still have a trained interviewer available. So I spent a lot of time here because this is really important. You want to build the skills on interviewing. You want to be able to identify when new information is emerging. There seems to be changes in the reasons customers are giving around why they're churning. You don't want them associated with the customer, so that you can get beyond that social, let's be nice, let's be likable, and get into the real, sometimes hard to hear reasons why customers are churning. And then, of course, for the practical reasons, perhaps one of your interviewers changes jobs or is unavailable. Okay, I will tell you right now, interviews are actually quite simple. Oops, I went right past where I was supposed to go. Right here. It is 3 parts. There's an intro, there's questions, and there's the close. So here it is, the three parts. The introduction. This is really critical. This is where trust is built. Again, you're having somebody come in, whether you're doing it yourself with a CSM or a CS leader on your team, or you're hiring a company like ours to come in. You have to establish trust. We've all been in situations where somebody's told us, hey, this is what it's going to be like. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, wow, this isn't even close to what I thought it would be. We come in with our guards up. We're not sure. So you take that time. You want them to feel comfortable enough to open and share their true feelings, their true thoughts without judgment. So you want to really establish that trust. I'm going to give you one tip right now that's super helpful, is give them an out. So in other words, say, if you don't feel comfortable answering a question, we can either skip the question and go to another one, or we can come back to it later, or you have the choice not to answer it at all. And when you do that, you can like visibly watch people sort of relax. And that's what you want, because by letting their guard down, they're more likely to be honest with you. The other thing that we say as well is at any time, if they want to leave, they can. That they are not required to stay to the very end. And by giving them those outs or giving them those options, it's remarkable how people will then sit back, they will relax and feel more comfortable sharing with you what's really going on inside their heads. Ask the questions that you prepared earlier. That's pretty straightforward. Again, probing for more details. Tell me more about that. How did that feel? What did you have to do? What did you have to do instead? All of those types of questions. And then the close. This is where you'll close the interview. Let them know, first of all, thank them for their time, because that's 30 minutes of their time that they spent with you that they won't get back. And let them know what the next steps are, whether there's going to be a follow-up, if they have any further questions, how they can reach out to you and get those answered. And last of all, I cannot say enough, record all your exit interviews. And the next section is going to explain why this is so key. You don't want to be taking notes furiously by hand or typing, because if you're establishing trust, it's hard to see in our little boxes, especially on Zoom. If you're doing it online, I have no idea what you're doing. I can't see. And so our brains kind of go into this, uncertain mode, and we're likely to bring our defenses back up. So record all your interviews, because the next section is the analysis. We're going to look for themes and we're going to look for sentiment. So obviously, the easiest way to discover what your themes are is just go look at the questions you asked. We had talked about this earlier. In this case, I had talked about product and the decision to churn. And the first time you're going through these transcripts, you are literally just labeling very broadly. Yep, this was where they spoke about product. This is where they spoke about product. This is where they talked about the reasons to churn. So very simple. The next one is the smaller themes. This is where you're going to really start getting into the nitty gritty. So let's use the example of why they decided to churn. Let's say they said it was too expensive. So too expensive is price. So that's the smaller theme, is price. So you would tag this as price. Let's say they didn't use it enough. All right. That would be usage. So that would be the smaller theme. And lastly, their decision to churn, maybe they didn't find it helpful. Often that's how the customer would explain it, but we all know that's related to value. And lastly, you want to look at sentiment. So two types of sentiment that are easy to figure out. Was this a positive churn interview? Some of them will be. Some of them will, they really enjoyed the product, but maybe there was a management change, maybe a champion left. So is it a positive interview, a negative one, and of course, then neutral? And you want to track this over time. So in the beginning, like I said, you might struggle to get some participation rates, but if you are finding consistently of the interviews that you are running that they're all negative, then that shows there's a lot of opportunity. But as you track this over time, what you might start finding is that some of these interviews that you're doing are neutral or positive. And that's it's a lagging indicator, but still it shows you that whatever you have been doing is starting to change the feeling the customers have around your product. And of course, after this, you want to share the results internally. So this means sharing with your internal stakeholders. If you're just running this on your own without letting them know, then once you've got some interviews under your belt, maybe 10 to 20, where you can start seeing patterns, this is a really great time to then share with your leadership or your colleagues, depending on what your relationship is like with them, about the results you're seeing, what you're hearing, and of course, identifying any opportunities that come from that. Secondly, you're going to want to assign actions to your team. So what did you hear in those interviews that your team is responsible for and can take action? I will tell you right now, one of the big places, onboarding, right? So you're looking at churn. We have short-term churn. This is where customers become customers. They onboard or partially onboard, and then they churn in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, really, really short term. As one of the biggest areas where the seeds of churn are planted. So assign those actions, start tracking the changes and see how your metrics change. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, you want to measure that change in sentiment and those smaller theme areas over time. When COVID hit and companies all of a sudden started getting larger volumes of customers churning, the reasons would have been very different than they would have been 6 months earlier. So that was like, that was like an avalanche or tsunami on us. But the point is that everything changes in life. And therefore, the reasons why your customers are leaving will also start shifting. This just helps you keep your finger on the pulse of that. And then you're going to continuously collect churn data for those trends. And like I said, nothing stays the same, including the reasons why your customers leave. Helps you keep the finger on the pulse. You can discover new changes in feedback early, as soon as you're starting to hear them. That's why you want to at least have 2 interviewers who are doing this consistently, so they could start, oh, wow, that's something new we haven't heard before. And lastly, what this becomes for your company is a competitive advantage. Okay, so this not only has the churn interviews not only have the ability to, help you understand why customers are leaving, but some of this will become a competitive advantage, particularly around product or customer experience. And one bonus of churn interviews, you can always ask the interviewee if you can reach out again in 90 days. Because they've likely gone on to your competition and maybe the grass isn't so green as they thought it would be. So you can ask, can we reach out? And then maybe they might consider returning to you. And of course, you can hand this off to your sales team if they agree that, yes, you can contact them again in 90 days. All right, let's talk about some challenges you might encounter. The first is in setting up your churn interview program. I'm not going to go into great details here. If you notice, there's a little link at the bottom, and also with this recording and in the email, you'll see a link where I go into much greater detail about how to run these interviews. This webinar right here is just really an overarching view. So feel free to go to that link at the bottom and understand how to better set up a program that includes exit interviews. If you are struggling with recruiting, a couple of things you can do. First of all, you can set the expectations early with the customer. So in the onboarding process, and then gently over time, you can just mention that when they leave, you have this exit interview and leave it at that. Don't ask if they're interested way back in onboarding when you're first starting, but you just want to set that expectation. The other thing, you can add it to their contracts. Some companies have done that. And the other thing is you can put a positive spin on it. So let's say you're having a discussion and it's face to face with them. You can let them know, oh, they're not going to renew. Okay, we'd like to leave our relationship on a good note. Would you be interested in participating in an exit interview so that we understand better about what your experience was like? And then, of course, you might have some challenges around analyzing the data. I'll tell you, it can become a little tedious over time. AI is getting better at helping with this, but it's still got a ways to go. Really, your choices are, if you're struggling to analyze the data, you can buy VOC software or voice of the customer software. There's many companies out there. I stay agnostic, so you're just going to have to do a good old search on the internet and find the company that works with your tech stack. Or you can hire a company like ours to run the interviews and do the analysis for you. And lastly, I cannot stress this enough. Churn interviews are not an attempt to win back the customer. You want to go in there with an open mind to try to learn why your customers are churning. As I mentioned just a second ago, you want to leave the relationship on a good note. And so the good old bait and switch, I'm going to interview you for, to learn more about your experiences, but then I'm going to try to convince you to stay with us halfway through. Nobody likes that. Nobody. And we've all been the victim of it, and it feels horrible. So the best thing you can do is go in and actively listen and be respectful of whatever their position is, even if it's really hard to hear, even if you don't agree with what they're saying, it's wrong. You got to let that go and realize that it's more important to leave the relationship on a high note where they feel respected. Because, like I said, if they agree in 90 days to let you reach out to them, they might just come back as a customer. But if you try to railroad them into changing their minds during an exit interview, and essentially you lied to them about the purpose of that discussion, they won't come back at all. And that's extremely damaging to your brand as well. So these are things to consider. All right. So your churn interviews, they can give you an opportunity. You heard this story at the very beginning. This massive fast food chain with an M at the beginning wanted to improve milkshake sales. They went out and asked customers, hey, what's your ideal milkshake like? And they got a bunch of answers, and they didn't increase their milkshake sales. So they observed, and then they did customer interviews to find out what was going on. And they actually found out that these were commuters who were really interested in these milkshakes. And it wasn't so much they wanted milkshakes, but they wanted something that would sustain them on these long commutes, that was clean and easy for them. And that's how this entire smoothie line was created. So 4.7% in the first quarter after they launched that smoothie line, their revenues went up. That's really significant, and all from that customer exit data. The second thing is that it's going to help you see when you're on the right track. I got to tell you right now, it is not all doom and gloom with churn interviews. Yeah, you're going to find some hard stuff, but you're also going to find that occasionally you're going to find things that are really reassuring and uplifting. So we ran a series of customer exit interviews for a client. We did 40 of them. And, they were, trying to figure out whether the company should go up market or not. That was really what was driving the reason why they wanted to deeply understand why their customers were churning. They had a lot of ideas why, but they wanted validation and confirmation with firsthand data. So we did our customer interviews, and one of the things we do in reporting is we actually have a video clip. Again, why it's so important for you to record your interviews. So we found this one video clip of a customer that had churned, and she could not say enough about her CSM. She said, if I could give them an 11 out of 10, I would. And when we were reporting this to the clients, their eyes just went wide. They got so excited. They asked for that clip specifically and then sent it around to the entire company. You have to balance the negative with the positive. And this was something that showed that they were also on the right track. Yes, there was a lot of opportunity to change, but this was a place where they could really celebrate a strong win for what they were doing well. And lastly, churn interviews are going to give you the ability to reduce your churn. So Sean had a challenge. His customer churn rates were higher than he wanted, and he really didn't understand what was going on. So he knew that customers that were onboarding were really upset with having to answer the exact same questions that sales had asked them before they became a customer. So they weren't happy. And then he quickly discovered that they also, the expectations weren't being met. So there was a really big disconnect. So he undertook some customer feedback, did some interviews, and discovered that sales was selling to perfect customers was one, especially their high value customers. And the second thing was that in absence of sales helping them, customers were setting their own expectations, which of course, then when those expectations weren't met once they became a customer, they were churning. So these were the two big problems that he was challenged with. And the third challenge was the CEO was focused on increasing sales. The CEO was well aware that churn rates were high, but he still wanted to increase sales. So Sean knew he needed to get sales involved. He had a good relationship with them. And so they tried this test and got the CEO on board. He said it was like running your hands along coarse sandpaper. It was not a smooth process. But essentially, what he was able to do was get CSMs into the sales conversations with high value customers or complex customer sales. And the CSM, are you ready for this? Had veto power. Because the CSM knew all the challenges associated with those high value and complex customers, they were able to say, no, not a good customer for us. I'm going to veto this sale. No surprise, of course, that his monthly churn dropped from 3% to 0.5% because they were now only converting the most ideal customers for them. So I just want you to imagine having that big of an impact. All right, we are going to recap now. There are 3 problems with churn. One is you lose way more than revenue. The second is that it limits profitability. And the third is that churn is a complex issue. With customer interviews, you want to create a standard set of questions. So this is your interview guide. Same questions, always, 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 so that you can compare answers over time. You're going to recruit either in meetings, through a contract, or a cancellation survey. You have the same interviewers for consistency. We talked about this. Remember, it's so that they can hear new things changing. They are not associated with the customers. And also, in case one of them is not available, you always have somebody in backup. And fourthly, it's because interviewing is a skill. It takes time to get good at it. Intro, questions, close. Simple. You really, really need to establish trust in the introduction so that you can get those customers to open up and tell you what's really going on. You want to analyze your data for the big themes first. Those are, like I said, generally 2 to 3 themes you want to focus on. Then you'll pick out your little themes associated with them. And you also want to check for sentiment and share the results internally. Assign activities that come out of this to your team. And of course, you want to continuously collect this data for trends and changes. And you want to use customer churn interviews, to identify opportunities, like we saw with that very large fast food company, keep you on the right track. Remember, she loved her CSM, even though she churned. So it showed that the company was doing something right, gave her 11 out of 10 score. And of course, you want to use it to reduce churn. So I gave you that example of Sean going from 3% monthly churn down to 0.5% monthly churn by having CSMs involved in the sales process. And of course, metrics rise where retention thrives. The more that you can keep your customers, you're going to see positive, not only metrics in customer success, but because you've got such deep insights now into the minds of your customers through these interviews, you can also help other company metrics rise for product, for sales, like in Sean's example, sales now working with customer success. These interviews can impact the whole company, not just the customer success team. And so you can help use the data you learn to help your other customers stop churning. And lastly, if you want to get in touch with me, that's me on the screen in two places apparently, and here's the third, live. You can follow me on LinkedIn. So I talk about various things from customer retention, customer feedback, and the other thing I'm getting into is getting customer success into the C-suite. You're literally sitting with these exit interviews on a gold mine of customer insights data. If you can spread it across the company, those insights, and help marketing, sales, and product improve their metrics, it just makes your customer success team that much more valuable. And of course, ati.ac, that's where you'll find a bunch of free resources, as well as we have courses and a workshop. So there's a lot there. Dig in. There's no email required. Just click on what you want to read and it's instantly available. And please, please, please consider reaching out to me on LinkedIn and continuing that conversation. But I know before we get there, we're going to have the questions right here. So let's jump into them.
Awesome, Anita. It's been a great webinar. I've learned so much. I have a few questions and I can see the chat buzzing with questions as well. So I have two questions in just one right now. What are your thoughts on incentivizing the exit interviews? You give some incentive to your customers, and how do you incentivize that? Number one is, do you agree to incentivizing exit interviews? And second is, what are some creative ways to incentivize your customers for just participating in the exit interview?
Oh, this is a great question. And I purposely skipped that. I used to put it in here and I was like, nah, let's have a discussion about this. First of all, that guide that I mentioned, it does specifically address this and gives dollar amounts and who should be incentivized. So by saying that, yes, you need to. You've got to think about the psychology, just even for yourself. If you've churned from being a customer, mentally you're already moving on. So why would I give half an hour of my time when really I'm not receiving anything back? So we call it an appreciation or thank you gift, because I really am. I appreciate you took 30 minutes of your time to sit with me, to open up, to be honest with me about what's going on with you. I can't send you away with nothing. So when you do this, you will have to get budget if you are looking at a monetary appreciation or thank you gift. I have to say that's probably the best way to do it. Offering things like AirPods and stuff. I'm a Samsung girl, I use Windows. That's me. So you've just excluded me. And maybe I would have been interested if it was something more general. So the gift cards work. That's what we use. Gift cards are the easiest. You can send them electronically. You can bulk send them as well. if you have a whole bunch to send at once. So you want to do that. The other thing, though, that is mentioned in the guide, I didn't mention here, but I'm mentioning now. Depending on who you're interviewing, you are going to have a different dollar amount that you're going to be offering. Executives, they're not interested in a $50 gift card. So you have to start. If you want those decision makers and really understand why they made the decision they did, that then it requires either a significantly larger amount, or you can add in other things like looking to introduce them to somebody that would be valuable to them. Maybe that's a colleague of yours that you know from another company. Maybe you have to get your senior executive team involved as well, because it's more their network that will likely be tapped into than your own personal one. So once you get at that exec level, the money doesn't really seem to motivate them, but introducing them to somebody in your executive team's network, that we have found is one of the most powerful ways to get those decision makers involved.
Right. Great. Another question that I have is for startups, right?
Okay.
So
Yep.
startups that are yet to find the product market fit, how would they leverage exit into their product map?
Yeah, the exact same way. You want to ask customers that are leaving. But if you're a startup, the great thing is just change the questions. Instead of asking when they're onboarding, you can do this. Is instead of why, the decision to leave, how about the decision to buy?
Right.
That's it. You're just changing that theme. So product, you want to ask specific questions about the product, but their decision to buy. What were they doing before they purchased your product? What pain point are they looking to solve? What else were they looking at as solutions? Because remember, it's not always your competitors. Often your biggest competitor is they're going to stay with status quo, right? So it's understanding what led them to make those actions and how did they feel? How did they feel when they were searching the marketplace and, there were 50 other companies that does similar things to yours. How did they sort through that? That's the stuff you want, because that will help you get product market fit much, much faster, because you're literally tapping into, their decision-making process.
Right. Great. That's a great insight. Now let's move on to what our audience have to ask. So just scroll through here. I have a question from Nandini. How should results from enterprise customer exit interviews influence sales targeting, account management, resourcing, and customer success segmentation?
Okay, I will probably have to read that question because it was a little bit longer. I caught part of it.
The very first question.
It's the very first question. Okay, let me just get up. There we go. How should results from influence? Oh, great question. Great question. So, generally, when you're dealing with enterprise customers, you have a team that's making the decision. With a lot of software, especially if you sell to SMB, maybe you're just selling to one person, right? A solopreneur or, a consultant or very, a very small company. With enterprise, you have teams, 5, 7, 8 people involved. As best as possible, and this is where that incentive comes in with the, who can I introduce you to? So you've got to have your exec team on board with running these exit interviews. You want to start understanding how the CFO thinks differently than the CEO, than the COO, than a chief customer officer if they have it, or their head of HR or chief marketing officer. Like, all of those roles have different value systems and different drivers. So as much as possible, when you're doing these exit interviews, you want to really float up what are the similarities? So where do they all align? And then what are the differences? Because your sales team in enterprise sales will be doing this already. You're just now arming them with more information. The other thing that's like so golden is the CFO is going to use different words than the CEO, than the COO. And that for sales becomes really helpful, because then when they're addressing the challenges of the CFO, they can speak the CFO specific language. And you got that from your exit interviews. Resourcing staff and customer success segmentation. So I think it becomes the same thing. You are going to see that those different roles think differently. They have different values and they have different goals they're looking to achieve through your product. So customer success segmentation, one of the most powerful ways to do it is by the goal that they're looking to achieve. So that might be segmentation, not just on, let's say, ARR, but layer it on. Perhaps it's by job title, or again, just even the goal they're looking to achieve, irrespective of what their job title is. So it just gives you options. Like, it's just layering. If you're cooking, you want to add different layers of flavor to make it robust. That's all you're doing here. You start simply, even with segmentation. Let's just segment by ARR or product line or whatever it is. And then you start adding these nuances. And that's what the customer interviews allow you to do.
Awesome. So we have a question from Chirabrata, who's asking us, what do you recommend, or do you recommend to conduct churn interviews for customers who are not the right fit anymore as the company grows?
So, sorry, again. Okay. Is it the next question?
Yes.
Who are not a right fit anymore? Yes. Yes, because knowing who are your ideal customers means you have to know who's not ideal. So
Right.
In the beginning, if your ICP is changing or your ideal customer profile is changing, absolutely. Because the more you can define who is ideal and who isn't, it makes it way easier for marketing to then attract the customers that you're looking to attract. And same with sales, with converting them. So yes, but at some point you'll realize quite quickly, okay, we have enough data here, and then you're not looking so much to interview those. But it is really super helpful. The compare contrast, comparing how things are similar and then contrasting how they're different. That clarity allows you, customer success, sales, marketing, and product to move much faster.
Right. Great. So we have a question from Gary. How have exit interviews provided insight to leading indicators?
Oh, wow. Oh, Gary. Okay. So what the exit interviews do, they tend not to provide so much for leading indicators specifically, because when you're running exit interviews, you're tending to be really broad, right? You're trying to capture almost their entire customer journey. And if they've been with you for some time, that could be a lot. You can take this exact same process. Remember with startups, there was the question, and I just said, just change it from deciding to churn to deciding to buy. This is the exact same process, regardless of what type of interviews you're running. So Gary, if there's something that you are specifically trying to understand that will move a leading metric, just take this process and change that theme to whatever it is. So if it's something related to, let's say, time to value and trying to understand what that is, well, you can still do customer interviews to understand what customers are experiencing when they're first onboarding. What they think of, the value that they got, that first value, how it impacted them. Like, you're still really digging deep into the psychology of what's going on in your customers' minds. So just take this exact same process. You may not have to go 30 minutes. You may only do 15 to 20 for that, because you are now just so narrowly focused on one thing. But same process, download the guide, and it'll take you through, and then you can discover what it is specific to that leading indicator and opportunities to improve it.
Awesome. Another question from Gary himself. How to quantify CSM participation in sales? There is a cost for potential value.
That I've got to say, Gary, I love the question, but it's a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion, and really not something that I'm so familiar with. But since Gary and I know each other, Gary, just DM me, and I can put you in touch with somebody who can better answer that and that is doing that. So just DM me over on LinkedIn, and we'll get that answer. We'll get that answer to you one way or another.
Or we can have another webinar on the same topic.
That wouldn't be me, though. But you could. Well, you absolutely could.
Awesome. So given the time, I'll go with the last question and then we can wrap this up.
Yeah.
In your experience, what percentage of existing customers are willing to participate in an exit interview?
Wow. So this is a really great question. Again, when you're first starting this, your participation rates are going to be low. Like, do not be surprised if it's like anywhere from 5 to 10%, like super low, might even be lower than that. The reason is it really depends on what type of engagement you have with your customers. Okay. Like, I'll be honest, if it's more like I don't like the term digital customer success, but if it's more kind of self-serve for the customers, then your rates might be lower. The other thing too is that incentive matters when you're talking with, whether it's the decision makers or end users or whoever it is that you're looking to interview. With end users, it's got to be something that's worth their time. So if you're running a 30-minute interview with them, you can't give them $10. Like, it's not going to work. Nobody's going to see that as a fair trade for their time. So you can generally double whatever it is. So if it's 30 minutes, it's $60, 50, 60, 70, depending again. And then that really helps, I will say. And then encouraging participation from, the decision makers or those senior execs. Then you have to get your exec team involved and agreeing to being able to leverage something like their networks as a way to incentivize them. Over time, you got to test what language works. Does it make sense to put it in a contract? Again, if you can mention it gently through onboarding, but then also just in your, regular interactions with your customers, that this is something that you do, then it's not dropped like a bomb on them at the very end. And they're more comfortable with the idea because they've heard it over and over and over again, just gently, that this is something that you can do. The last thing that I really encourage companies to do is something called close the loop. And that is share some of the data, the customer, and this will not just be your interview data, but your larger customer feedback data from your surveys or your focus groups, but what you're hearing with customers. And it's really helpful when you're a customer to be able to compare yourself to what other customers are doing. It's kind of the am I normal idea. So those are some of the ways. The guide, again, goes into this a little bit further, but hopefully that will help you get your participation rates up.
Awesome. So I think that's all. Thank you, Anita, for your time and for making this webinar happen for us. And as a closing note, thank you everyone for participating today. I would like to just emphasize that these are all community-driven webinars. So if anybody who wants to host with us or be a guest speaker, you can reach out to me at admin@Customer Centricity Club, and we'll make that happen for you. We'll continue this conversation in our community. So please join our community and have a good day, guys. Thank you.